You were told generosity is a virtue, that giving your time, help, and energy makes you a good person, that kindness helps you rise, and that it will come back to you. But Machiavelli didn't see it that way. He wasn't a believer in karma. He believed in leverage. He saw something most people won't admit. The world doesn't reward generosity. It studies it, because when you give too easily, too often, and too soon, you don't inspire gratitude. You signal availability, and availability breeds entitlement. Left unchecked, entitlement turns youth, a generous one, into a resource to be drained, not a person to be respected. Let's be real. How often have you helped someone, only to be ghosted when you needed help? How often have you gone out of your way for someone else, only to be taken for granted the moment you stopped? How many times have you thought, they'll remember what I did for them, and they simply didn't? Machiavelli would say you weren't kind, you were miscalculated. You gave without power. And in the game of influence, giving without power means losing control. There's a reason Machiavelli warned rulers never to be generous too early in their reign. He understood generosity is not just a gift, it's a message. It tells people how to treat you, how much they can expect, and what they lose if they walk away. Give before you've established strength, and you teach people you're a servant. Once that label sticks, no amount of boundary setting will fully fix it. The real problem: most people think generosity earns connection. But in Machiavelli's world, generosity doesn't earn anything. It costs you if the timing, delivery, and context are wrong. Let's unpack the psychology behind this. The first big pattern to understand is this: unconditional giving creates conditional respect. You might believe giving with no strings is noble, but that's a fantasy. Expectations always get created, just not by you, but by the people watching you. They notice how fast you say yes, how often you drop everything to help, how easily you put your needs second. What starts as admiration quickly turns into entitlement. They stop thanking you. Instead, they start expecting a hand. They no longer see your time or energy as gifts, but obligations you owe. And once that line is crossed, there's no going back. So what's Machiavelli's solution? He'd say generosity must be earned, and it must feel costly, not costly to you, but costly to them. People value what they struggle to get. They respect what requires effort. Loyalty sticks to what isn't given easily. Your time, your energy, your help, they shouldn't flow freely. They should be guarded, so when you do give, it feels like a privilege, not a routine. Here's where it gets tricky. Once people see you as generous, they start testing limits, not necessarily out of malice, but simply because they can. They push boundaries, ask for more, say, just this once, guilt trip, or flatter you into staying on their hook. This is the trap Machiavelli feared most. When your goodness becomes your weakness, when people realize they can manipulate you with compliments, guilt, or flattery, respect fades. They begin to manage you, and across all relationships, personal, professional, romantic, the moment you give more than you get, the balance shifts. This doesn't hit with a big blow. It's subtle. A nod, a smile, a quick thanks, you're amazing. You think that means loyalty, but to Machiavelli, it means you just became the easy one. The one who always says yes, who overextends, who gives without demand. That's not kindness. That's self-sabotage disguised as virtue. Let's dive even deeper. There's a second psychological shift with overgenerosity, especially in groups. The more you give, the less valuable you become. Sounds crazy, but it's how group dynamics work. In meetings, you offer more help than others. They take it for granted. In friendships, you're the free therapist giving top advice. You do the emotional labor in relationships. Over time, no one even notices or appreciates you anymore. Generosity repeated too often becomes invisible. Invisible equals no respect. Machiavelli said power isn't in giving, it's in withholding. The person who knows when to say no is the one that everyone pays attention to. The one who gives only after being asked, only after others have proven themselves, only when the impact is strategic. That person commands respect. If you want people to value your kindness, stop giving first. Let them come to you. Let them earn it. Then reveal your generosity. Not cruelty, strategic respect. Respect is the bedrock of enduring power structures. This is where most good people lose the game from the start. They think withholding is mean or manipulative. They think delaying giving is fake. But Machiavelli knew better. He said what people chase, they cherish. What's handed out too easily, they forget. If your kindness isn't respected, If your generosity gets you used, if you're just a background player in your own story, it's not because you're too kind. It's because your kindness wasn't leveraged. And Machiavelli would say there is still time to reverse it. But it starts with one ruthless mindset shift. You stop giving just because it feels good. You start giving when it gives you power. The sneakiest part of generosity is how righteous and justified it feels. You think, I'm the bigger person. You think your giving builds bridges, cements loyalty that people will remember who helped them when no one else did. Machiavelli would scoff. He knew human memory is cold and unforgiving. People rarely remember kindness that's always available. They only remember it when it's taken away. When you give freely and constantly, become too accessible. You're like background noise, always there, easily reached, invisible. When your presence is assumed, your absence carries no weight. And here's where it gets twisted. The more generous you are, the more people resent you when you finally stop. You might think they'd say, thank you for what you did. Instead, they say, why now? They act like you changed, as if all your giving was conditional. People don't track what you've given. They only feel the loss of what they assumed was theirs. That's the Machiavellian flip. Your generosity doesn't make them grateful. It creates dependence. And dependence without consequence breeds entitlement. Entitled people get hostile when the flow dries up. That's exactly why Machiavelli warned a prince to avoid generosity that brings neither reputation nor gratitude. So what now? You start weaponizing absence. When people have grown used to your help, support, or validation, you pull back. No explanations, no punishments, just silence. In that stillness, something powerful happens. They realize how much they took for granted. They feel the vacuum. You flip the script, no longer background noise, but a presence they have to earn back. But this only works if you first understand timing. Machiavelli never said, don't be generous. He said, be feared before you're loved. If people respect your boundaries first, know you're not easily moved, that your time and approval are earned, then your generosity becomes powerful, unforgettable, and binding. It's not about withholding forever. It's about control before you give. Let's break this down one step further. Even high-status people fall into a trap. They overgive in public to prove value. They step up when no one else does, eager to be seen as reliable, essential, indispensable. Sure, they get attention for a while, but eventually, something changes. Instead of being powerful, they become useful. And useful without scarcity leads to servitude. When people see you as always available, your reputation shifts. Respected figure to functioning tool. They may praise you, but they don't fear losing you. And the moment they don't fear losing you, they already have . So here's the Machiavellian pivot. Value isn't proven by giving. It's proven by being and nothing makes you unreplaceable faster than being willing to walk away from those who treat you as an asset. That's the Machiavellian flex. You don't argue or demand credit. You remove yourself and let the silence speak louder than any words. Now, let's talk about the most manipulative force. Your generosity attracts the professional parasite. This is the person who lives off your They don't ask outright. They suggest. They don't demand. They hint. They compliment you just enough to keep you saying yes. They'll say something like, you're so generous. I knew I could count on you. With that one line, they tie your identity to your availability. If you say no, suddenly you're not who they thought you were, and you fall for it. Because your identity is wrapped up in giving. So you double down. You help more. You say yes even when it costs you. Even when they don't deserve it. Machiavelli would say they're not wrong for using you. You're wrong for being so usable. The parasite only survives if the host allows it. What's the counter? You break the pattern. You start testing people used to your kindness. You offer partial help. Then pause. You give a small favor but ask for something back. You watch how they respond when you put a price on your energy. If they pull away, get quiet, act hurt, or distant, you've exposed them. Not as villains, but as people who never respected your generosity. They only valued your utility. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming strategic, because the game Machiavelli played wasn't about looking kind. It was about placing kindness carefully. Who gets it, when, and why. Once you control those three, you stop being a target. You become the storm no one knows how to ask anything from. When generosity becomes expected, it's no longer generosity. It's a silent contract you never signed. And now, every time you hesitate, every time you protect your energy, every time you say no, you're not neutral, you're seen as selfish. There's the paradox: the more generous you are, the less room you have to say no because others think your default is yes. Machiavelli would call that a strategic failure of positioning. Now, you're judged less by what you give, and more by when you don't. And that's exactly how power leaks, not by betrayal or loss, but by routine availability. You train people to expect you, and what's expected becomes taken for granted. Next, people talk about your boundaries like attitude changes. She's been acting different. He used to be more helpful. They've changed. Nobody talks about how much you gave, the exhaustion, the slow burn, or the cost. They only notice their access is inconvenient. That's why Machiavelli never gave without a purpose. He didn't believe in unconditional gestures. Every move is a signal, either building power or draining it. And your generosity has been signaling one thing: I'm always here. No need to give back. That kind of generosity doesn't elevate. It collapses you into support. Machiavelli would ask, do you want to be the hero in your story, or just the helper in someone else's? Alright, let's continue from where we left off, building on the strategic approach to generosity described earlier. At this point, it's clear that true power doesn't come from open-handedness without boundaries. Machiavelli understood that the key to lasting influence is control over how and when you give, and most importantly, over who truly earns your trust and generosity. Now, let's talk about the practical steps to implement this mindset, the specific tactics that will help you elevate your influence and protect your sovereignty. We'll break this down into actionable principles that you can start applying today. The first principle: delay the gift. The foundation of strategic generosity is patience. You never give immediately. You create space for timing to work in your favor. This might seem counterintuitive if you're used to responding right away, but think about it. When you delay, you introduce friction into the process, forcing people to reconsider whether they truly deserve your support. Some simple phrases can help. I'll think about it and get back to you tomorrow. Let me sit with that for a bit. I'm currently focused on other priorities. I'll revisit when I can. These kinds of statements do more than just buy time. They send a signal. They suggest that your resources, whether your time, energy, or emotional support, are limited, and they aren't just handed out on demand. Over time, this cultivates respect, as people begin to understand that your generosity is not infinite, nor unconditional. The second principle: weigh the exchange before you give. Be brutally honest with yourself. What are you really getting in return? Machiavelli would say that power isn't in giving for its own sake, it's in ensuring a balance, a mutual respect that doesn't diminish your stature. Ask yourself, does this person treat me with respect when I'm not around? Do they offer me emotional loyalty, insight, or effort? Are they matching my energy, especially when I'm at my lowest? If the answer is no, then giving isn't generosity. It's a slow surrender of self. Machiavelli calls this self-governance, the discipline to withhold when the exchange isn't balanced. Giving without reciprocation diminishes your influence and turns you into a resource they can exploit. The third principle: announce value without announcing intent. This is about subtlety and precision. You want to give, but only when it carries weight. Your action should be calculated and framed as high value, not routine. Do a favor only after they've proven they're capable of standing on their own. Support them without promising future obligations. Never declare, I'm being generous. Let your actions speak louder than words. The key is to make your acts of kindness rare, meaningful, and deliberately timed. When people lean in to get your help, they're subconsciously recognizing that your support is earned, not expected. Building a signal of boundaries. Once you master delaying, weighing, and choosing moments to give, it's time to reinforce your boundaries with language. Use calm, professional statements to establish that your time and energy are finite. I'll check my schedule and see if I can fit that in. I need to prioritize some other commitments first. Let me see how that aligns with my current priorities. These phrases don't shut down requests. They assert that your resources are limited and that your support must be earned. This creates a silent but powerful signal. You only give when it's truly strategic. The power of silence and absency. Crucial Machiavellian tactic is the weaponization of absence. When someone has grown used to your help, your support, or your presence, a simple pause can reshape the entire dynamic. When you notice they're relying too much or taking you for granted, step back without explanation. Stop offering support temporarily. Let them feel the vacuum. This isn't about punishment. It's about re-establishing respect. They'll start to realize how much they depended on your unearned generosity. The absence makes your value real again. It turns your support into a privilege, not a given. It's important to understand that this approach only works if your boundaries are clear from the start. Those who understand your limits respect them. Those who don't will reveal themselves when you withdraw. The final key: be unpredictable and unreplaceables. You've established boundaries and mastered delayed, strategic giving. The next step is to become unavoidably valuable. Instead of proving your worth through constant giving, demonstrate it by being the person who can walk away without losing anything. If you're always available, you're vulnerable to being replaced, seen as useful, but not indispensable. Machiavelli emphasized that the true measure of power is in the ability to say no and walk away, leaving others to miss your presence. When people know they can't control or fully rely on you, they cherish you more. The ultimate flex: withdraw your presence from those who treat you like an asset. Let the silence and absence do the heavy lifting. When you disappear, the gap you're leaving draws attention, reawakening respect and desire. Creating a culture of respect. This approach isn't just about individual interactions, it's about shifting the entire relationship culture. When you consistently show that your resources are limited and your support is earned, not given freely, others adapt. They learn to approach you with more respect, more thought, and more appreciation. Over time, your reputation shifts from the helpful one to the unmovable force. People will stop expecting you to deliver on demand because they've learned that your generosity is a privilege, not a default. Now, let's get clinical and expose how your generosity might actually be training people to overlook you. This shift happens in 3 phases. Phase 1. Idealization. At first, people are in awe of you. You're helpful, reliable, a problem solver. They say things like you're incredible, or you're a rare breed. It feels great to hear that, right? But what you may not realize is they're not admiring who you are as a person. They're admiring the results you deliver. They're falling in love with what you do, not with you as an individual. Phase 2. Integration. Next comes integration. They become so accustomed to your help that they adjust their lives around it. They rely on you, expect you to show up, and plan with your support in mind. The problem: you start to become more like infrastructure, automatic, built-in, and constant. You're no longer seen as a conscious person who chooses to give. You're just part of the operating system everyone depends on. Phase 3. Devaluation. Then comes the harshest phase, devaluation. When you slow down, pull back, or ask for reciprocity, the reaction isn't concern or gratitude. It's irritation or even resentment. Why? Because once they've grown too used to your presence, the absence isn't respected, disrupts their expectations. Machiavelli would call this the decay of perceived power. This happens because they never feared losing you in the first place. If they had, they'd have valued your generosity more. Instead, when you step away, it feels like a loss to them, but a loss they feel entitled to reverse quickly, often by demanding more from you or complaining about your change. So what's the solution? How do you flip the script and reframe these relationships on your terms? You start by re-engineering the frame. Stop giving before the relationship with that person is clearly defined. Wait, observe, and let them make the first move. Respond with calculated generosity, not open-handed availability. Say things like, "I'll check if I have bandwidth. I've got some priorities. I need to sort first. Let me see if that aligns with my schedule." These phrases keep your energy and time yours until you say otherwise. They don't sound harsh or hostile. They sound professional and calm. Machiavelli would approve of this kind of language because it enforces distance without drama. Distance is what creates value. Immediate access destroys value. When you're always available, your generosity becomes expected rather than appreciated. Now, here's the twist. The worst side effect of unchecked generosity isn't how others treat you. It's how you start to treat yourself. You might find yourself feeling guilty for prioritizing your own needs. Rest becomes a struggle, even when you're exhausted. You measure your worth by how useful you are to others. Receiving help even when you need it feels uncomfortable. This pattern is how the self-eraser is created inside, and Machiavelli would call it the ultimate loss of sovereignty. You're like a ruler who pays everyone's bills, including your own, effectively taxing yourself into depletion. This is why it's critical to build a new identity framework, where your value is tied to what you withhold strategically, not just what you give. Learn to say no, not as rebellion, but as a clear signpost to yourself and others that you choose when, how, and to whom you give. Protect your energy, not out of selfishness, but out of recognition that overgiving makes your power disposable. Be prepared for discomfort. People won't understand your boundaries right away. They might think you've changed. They might misinterpret your limits. But here's the catch. Power almost always looks like arrogance to those who benefited from your lack of it. Machiavelli would smile at that. When people say you've changed, what they're really saying is, you've stopped being convenient. And that's a good thing. It means they're finally seeing your generosity for what it should have been all along: a choice, not a service. A signal of strength, not submission. When you give again after this reset, it hits differently because it's rare, it's costly, and it reminds people what it really means to have your favor. There's a moment when the scales finally tip. The people who once expected your help without hesitation, who treated your time as endlessly available, start to notice the shift, not because you said anything, but because you simply stopped offering. That silence, that absence that is where respect is reborn. Machiavelli wouldn't waste time fighting for appreciation. He wouldn't explain why he pulled back. He would let the gap do the talking, because that's what real power does. It makes others reflect, and if they don't, then you've identified the people who were never truly worth your generosity in the first place. Here's the final Machiavellian truth. Real power isn't in what you give. It's in what you can deny. When people feel entitled to your energy, your help, and your presence, your greatest weapon isn't confrontation, it's scarcity. Let your generosity become a rare phenomenon, something that's earned, not begged for or assumed. A gift that lands with weight when it arrives, not filler for silence because you're too uncomfortable saying no. To make this concrete, here is the 3-step Machiavellian framework for power-aligned generosity. Delay the gift. Never give immediately. Create space and time before responding to requests, whether it's your time, resources, or emotional support. This disruption creates friction, which disrupts entitlement. Weigh the exchange. Before giving, ask, what does this person offer me in return? Not in material terms, but in respect, loyalty, effort, and energy. If they don't offer balance, then withholding is not selfishness, it's self-governance. Announce value without announcing intent. Give rarely. When you do, make it calculated and high value. Support others, but only after they've proven themselves, and without promising future obligations. Let your actions speak, and use silence as a powerful tool. Once you stop being overly available, people start paying attention. They lean in, wait for your words, adjust their tone when approaching you. You train them not through punishment, but absence. Not through shouting, but calculated generosity. That's how kings operate. That's how Machiavelli would move in a world full of beggars disguised as allies. What's truly freeing about this whole approach is that you don't owe anyone an explanation for your change. You don't have to justify your new boundaries or lay out your rules. The people who genuinely respect you will sense the shift and automatically adjust, while those who complain or push back were never grateful to begin with. They were just greedy, accustomed to taking without any real appreciation. By pulling back quietly, you've peeled off the mask. You've exposed who truly values you and who was only there for the easy access to your generosity. And here's where the ultimate reversal happens. When your generosity becomes rare, it also becomes expensive. And when generosity is expensive, it becomes desirable. Suddenly, people start working to earn your favor, not because they owe you, but because they recognize that your time, your energy, your help, these are privileges, not entitlements. This is the final transformation Machiavelli envisioned. You shift from being the drained giver to the ruler who decides, from the person who's used and taken for granted, to the figure of power, prestige, and even a little fear. Not because you're cruel, not because you're withholding out of spite, but because you finally understand what generosity was always meant to be. Not your default setting, not your identity, but your most powerful weapon. A weapon that's unpredictable, rare, strategically used, and remembered forever. Embracing this mindset means you walk away from the trap of self-sacrifice and invisibility. Instead of being drained by others' expectations, you fuel your own agency and sovereignty. You become someone who decides when to show up, who to help, and how to give with intention, control, and respect for yourself first. So what does this look like in everyday life? Imagine getting a request for help. Instead of immediately saying yes, you pause, You evaluate. You think, what's in this for me? How will this affect my energy and boundaries? You say something like, let me check my schedule and get back to you. Make them wait. You weigh the balance of what they contribute to your life. You give only after they've shown their value and respect for your time. And when you help, you do it without strings, but in a way that reminds them your generosity isn't a given, it's a gift, earned and rare. Because here's the truth. People don't respect what is constantly available. They don't value what's free and easy, but they hunger for what's scarce and meaningful. It's a tough shift, because it feels like you're denying kindness or love. But Machiavelli teaches us it's not about denying kindness, it's about directing it with strategy. Powerful generosity isn't about self-sacrifice, it's about sovereign giving that preserves your strength. When you give like this, you dignify yourself, not diminish yourself. You command respect. Instead of inciting entitlement, remember, generosity is a message. It tells the world how they should treat you. So if you let it flow too freely, you teach them that you're always available. And that's how you become a target for draining and overuse. But if you use generosity to signal scarcity, strength, and calculated choice, you become a force to be reckoned with. And when you walk that path, you become the kind of person people don't just want to have around, they want to earn your favor because they know it's not given lightly. You become the one who holds the cards. You become unrepeable. This is how you transform generosity from a hidden weakness into your greatest strength. You stop being the helper who's used up. You become the king or queen who decides. So, to wrap it all up, here's the truth. No one really wants to admit about generosity. It's not just about kindness or doing the right thing. It's a tool, a weapon of power and influence when used wisely, and a trap when wielded carelessly. Machiavelli knew that generosity is never truly free. Every time you give without strategy, without boundaries, you lose something: control, respect, sometimes even yourself. But when generosity is aligned with power, that's when it becomes truly transformative. Think about it. Generosity, when used as a calculated act, is one of the strongest currencies you have. It builds alliances, commands loyalty, and carves out your place not just as a giver, but as a respected leader. The game isn't about giving more, it's about giving because you choose to. When you choose to those who've earned it. The problem most people face is their generosity is fluid and unguarded. They pour themselves out freely and endlessly, hoping it will be returned in kind. But most often, it's not. It's taken for granted or twisted into entitlement. Machiavelli calls this a failure of timing and positioning. You lose your power by being too available, too easy to use. That's why the greatest act of generosity is also the greatest act of withholding. Hold back, say no, create friction, make others earn. You not because you want to be cruel or selfish, but because you respect your own value enough to protect it. Because power doesn't come from being everyone's helper, it comes from being indispensable. And here's the rub. Once you stop being predictably generous, once you learn to say no and create scarcity around your kindness, people start to see you differently. They lean in, they adjust, they respect. It's not about being cold or manipulative, it's about being real, being intentional, being sovereign over your own energy and goodwill. So the biggest takeaway: don't give to be liked or appreciated. Give when it gives you power. Give when it strengthens your position. Give when it rewrites the rules in your favor. And if people get upset at your new boundaries, good. That's a sign you've started winning. Because when they say you've changed, what they really mean is you stopped being their easy target. That is how generosity stops making you a target, and instead makes you a force. A ruler who decides when to give, and to whom. A leader whose kindness carries weight, because it is never handed out lightly. It's not about losing your heart, it's about gaining your power. And that, in Machiavellian terms, is the ultimate victory. That's the secret they never told you about generosity. Use it well. Use it sparingly. Use it strategically. And watch as the world begins to respect not just what you give, but who you are.